Luis Fernandes was the Minister of Science, Technology and Innovation under Presidents Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff. He is a professor at the International Relations Institute and the Brics Policy Center of the Pontifical Catholic University of Rio de Janeiro, as well as an adjunct professor of the Federal University of Rio. So Luis, please go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank you once again for the invitation. I see a lot of friends, colleagues, comrades here discussing the situation in Brazil. I know I have a lot of friends from Brazil, comrades from Brazil, Walter, Gabriela, and everyone is very intensely involved in the political situation in our country. But among our friends, I see you're in third bonus. You haven't seen them for over 20 years. So I'd like to send them my greetings. I have 10 minutes. Is that right, Radhika? 10 minutes for my presentation? Okay. So, well, I'm back in government, and I'm the Deputy Minister for Science, Technology, and Innovation now in the new Lula government. I'm in charge of the main fund, which invests in scientific and technological development in Brazil. It's called the, it's a very obvious name, Fundo Nacional de Desenvolvimento Científico e Tecnológico, a national fund for scientific and technological development, which is our main instrument for supporting science and technology and innovation in Brazil. In our last meeting, I remember that the title of our meeting was the significance, I can't remember the exact title, but the significance or the meaning of Lula's return to power. But we had not at the time returned to power yet. We're in the midst of the election. The opinion polls showed or pointed to a landslide victory on the part of our coalition and Lula's candidacy to president. But I warned you that the game wasn't over yet, that we were still involved in a very intense struggle. And we still had to win the election. Then we could discuss the meaning of our victory. And the fact is, it was a very, very close call. Contrary to the expectations that we had in August or September. It was a very, very close call. I'd like to, I don't know if you have that dimension. The end result was less than 2% difference in the second round. Lula had 60 million votes. Bolsonaro had 58 million votes. He had more votes than he did in the previous election in which he was elected. So it was a very tight call. I listened to my dear comrade Walter say that what we experienced in Brazil January 8th, which is our equivalent to January 6th in the US, was unique. Of course, it has a number of unique features, but its inspiration is clearly Trump's attempt to overturn the result of the elections in the US. Trump's attempt was the roadmap for Bolsonaro and his supporters in Brazil to overturn the result of the elections in Brazil. And they have a common strategist, which was involved directly in both attempts, which is Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is directly involved in the attempts here to overturn the results of the Brazilian elections. So if we carry the situation from our last meeting to today, I mean, what it for me is clear is that the Bolsonaro supporters, including his strategists, including Steve Bannon, had a twin strategy to guarantee Bolsonaro's re-election or reinstatement in the presidency. The first strategy was to win the elections. And he involved, and his supporters involved heavily the state apparatus, to impose an artificial victory for Bolsonaro in the election in a number of manners. They approved legislation which gave temporary subsidies for the poorest sectors of the population, which would only last until December. So it was clearly electoral maneuver, illegal and anti-constitutional. But he had support in the Congress to take that forward. He, although his economic policy was ultra-liberal, he's a false nationalist. That's why I'm not clear. I don't think he's a fascist, because fascists, although authoritarian, tend to be nationalists. He's a false nationalist. His policy was absolutely ultra-liberal. And the price policies of our state petroleum company also were ultra-liberal, following international prices. He imposed state control over fuel prices for the 6 months in the second semester to have impact in the election. So he imposed state control of fuel prices to bring down inflation, make fuel cheaper, and try to stir electoral support out of that very limited temporary policy. In the election days, especially in the second round, he used the federal police, which patrol highways, to impede electors to be able to go to voting stations in the states where we were ahead, where Lula had a great polls showed his strongholds. In all Lula's strongholds, he mobilized the federal police, which control highways, to bring down electoral turnover in areas where we were clearly ahead in the opinion poll. So I'm giving you a couple of examples where he manipulated the state apparatus to try to intervene in the elections, trying to revert the results. So our electoral victory, though very tight, it's very significant because it overcame a total mobilization of the state apparatus to artificially produce Bolsonaro's victory in the election. I'd like to highlight that point. I don't know if it's clear for especially our friends and colleagues that are from other countries. At the same time, he had a second strategy, which was if Lula won the election, or if it seemed that Lula would win the election, to say that elections were frauded. And he attacked the electoral system. In our case, in Brazil, it's a totally electronic electoral system with electoral justice controlling and centralizing the control of the electoral process. So he started to question the electoral vote system, saying that it could be frauded, that there was a big fraud being prepared against him. And so he prepared his forces. That is clearly inspired by Trump and Steve Bannon. He prepared his forces to question the results of the elections and tried to stir a coup against the electoral results to create a situation in which he could continue in power, or he could produce new elections more favorable to him in having new elections convened. So he operated that throughout. He was systematically questioning our electronic voting system, saying that it was prone to frauds. When it seemed that he was close to losing the election, he tried to postpone the election. He tried to mobilize the military support for that position. He tried to mobilize support in Congress for that position because he was facing a very firm and strong opposition from our Supreme Court. And he was unable to mobilize the support to postpone the elections. And having lost the elections, he did not concede his loss. He continued to question the result of the elections, saying that the elections were frauded, and tried to prepare, mobilize his base. It's a very significant mass base. This is the second time in Brazil we have a extreme right political force with mass base. We had that in the 1930s with the proto-fascist movement called the Integralists that was very strong in the 1930s. Now we have a new extreme right force with a very mobilized mass base and a very significant social base, which means that it's something we will have to deal with for a long time. It's not a short time struggle, it's a prolonged struggle that we will have to face to overcome this new version of the extreme right in the world, but specifically in its how it expressed itself in Brazil. So he mobilized this mass base to question the result of the elections. He organized, tried to organize truck driver strikes like they did in Chile in 73.
And Canada.
And to disorganize the national economy. They tried to blockade national highways to provoke an economic collapse. And then when that didn't function adequately, they mobilized their mass protests to station themselves in front of military headquarters, calling for military intervention to overcome the electoral results because the electoral results were a fraud. Okay. Now here there are differences in Brazil and what happened in the U.S. in 2020.
And Luis, please wrap up with this last point, with these differences. Yeah.
Okay. The differences are that the military in the U.S. maintained a very professional position and did not align with Trump in his attempt to overcome the electoral results. Here in Brazil, Bolsonaro's positions gained widespread support in the base of the military. We have to deal with that, and divisions in the leadership of the military. The military did not align with his attempts to overcome the electoral results, but tolerated these pro-coup demonstrations, which were held in front of military headquarters throughout the country. And that was the territorial base for the coup attempt in January 8th here in Brazil. So there was this ambivalent position on the part of the military and a division in the military leadership. On the other hand, we had a very strong response from the Supreme Court. The only two ministers of the Supreme Court which had more vacillating positions were the two ministers nominated by Bolsonaro himself. The rest of the Supreme Court stood very firmly in defense of the electoral system and against the attempts to overturn the result of the elections. So that's a little bit different than in the United States. And our electoral system is different because we have electoral justice in which the whole system is controlled. It's not ratified by Congress as it was in January 6th and it is in the United States. It's controlled by the electoral justice, and the result was proclaimed in December 12th. So I know I've probably spoken too much, but I think this might be useful information for who's not from Brazil to follow the situation. But let me try to conclude. The defeat of the coup was a very important political victory for democratic forces in Brazil, not only left and progressive forces, democratic forces in general. It, in effect, consolidated our electoral victory, which had been strongly questioned and was being questioned until, still is, but now it's politically much weaker than it was before the questioning of the result of the election. And the government moved swiftly and firmly to punish and go after the organizers of the coup attempt. So we're in the midst of this political process now. The federal government intervened in the military and the police of our federal district, where our national government institutions are based, and managed to stabilize the situation. And it is now establishing a firmer control, supporting those sectors in the military leadership, which have positioned themselves against the coup attempts that came through in Brazil. So it's a moment of consolidation of our electoral victory. That's the moment we're in now. And we're facing a favorable political situation where Bolsonaro and his connections to these coup organizers are politically isolated. And we will now have the elections for the leaders in House of Representatives and in the Senate, and that will be a decisive battle in terms of isolating politically Bolsonaro's forces and supporters, although they still have a very significant mass base in the country. Let me just conclude. I'm sorry if I spoke too much, but I think this might be interesting information for all of you. But I must say, I was part of the committee which prepared the government program for our electoral alliance. And it's basically an anti-liberal program, anti-neoliberal program. It attempts to restructure a national development project in Brazil, which has an anti-imperialist content in it, although not an anti-imperialist rhetoric. By the way, that's clearly evident now in our foreign policy. We will have a new foreign policy for Brazil. Brazil will be a major actor in international relations. It will be a counter-hegemonic actor, promoting South-South cooperation, Latin American, South American integration. I mean, we'll be a major player with the new government and supporting progressive, democratic, anti-imperialist positions in major. I think that's something you can count on, and that's part of our program. However, our electoral victory was centered on basically it was a democratic front with neoliberal forces in it. So there are also neoliberal forces in our government, democratic neoliberal forces. So it's a coalition government. It's a democratic front, a coalition government. And there are tensions within the government itself, a unity in terms of defense of democracy and consolidating our democracy, but differences in terms of what economic and social programs should be put in action. So it's a coalition government. It's not entirely cohesive, but I understand that we will be able to make predominate within government the structuring of a new national development project with anti-imperialist and democratic content into it. But it's a struggle still. We have to still structure that program into effective public policy.
I'm Michael Hudson. I'm appearing here for the International Manifesto Group. If you like this video and ones like it, please subscribe. For more information, go to the address on this screen.